A prayer of Moses, the man of God. O Lord, you have been our refuge in every generation. Before the mountains came into being, before you brought forth the earth and the world, from eternity to eternity, you are God. You return man to dust. You decreed, return, you mortals, for in your sight 1,000 years are like yesterday that has passed, like a watch of the night. You engulf men in sleep. At daybreak, they are like grass that renews itself. At daybreak, it flourishes anew. By dusk, it withers and dries up. So we are consumed by your anger, terror-struck by your fury. You have set our iniquities before you, our hidden sins in the light of your face. All our days pass away in your wrath. We spend our years like a sigh. The span of our life is 70 years, or given the strength, 80 years. But the best of them are trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Who can know your furious anger? Your wrath matches the fear of you. Teach us to count our days rightly, that we may obtain a wise heart. Turn, O Lord, how long? Show mercy to your servants. Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days. Give us joy for as long as you have afflicted us, for the years we have suffered misfortune. Let your deeds be seen by your servants, your glory by their children. May the favor of the Lord our God be upon us. Let the work of our hands prosper. O prosper the work of our hands. From Psalm 90. Friends, the synagogue is our source of comfort. Wounded by loss, we retreat from life. The synagogue gathers us in. Into this place, we bring stories and prayers, unanswered questions, tears that need to be shed, moments of courage and laughter and pain. This place embraces them all, as this place embraces us all. All that we love, we must lose. So let us hold fast to the love that remains. Today, all of us walk the mourner's path. Together, may we find strength. This afternoon, we gather to remember a remarkable man, truly unique and dear to so very many, Dr. Michael S. Kogan. Michael was an active participant and generous supporter of several houses of worship in his beloved Charleston. Many weekends, you could find him here at KKBE on Friday night, Synagogue Emmanuel on Saturday morning, and maybe St. Stephen's or St. Johannes on Sunday. He was an incredibly generous benefactor, frequently stepping up to support that which needed to be done, or which he felt needed to be done, but which invariably benefited a great many others after he did it. And often he did these things quietly, behind the scenes. In fact, when thanked for his generosity, and how could we not, he would often shrug it off. What he was most proud of, and what he felt was far more valuable, was the time and expertise he shared so expansively in his own Jewish community and with so many throughout the Charleston interfaith community and far beyond. And all that he shared, his scholarship, his wisdom, his appreciation of beauty, his humor, his unparalleled storytelling, his charm and grace, all of it was a blessing indeed. It may not surprise you to hear that the service we conduct this afternoon in Michael's honor and memory has been very carefully and precisely scripted by Michael. All of the readings, music, speakers, and choreography here in the sanctuary and later in the cemetery were selected and arranged in order by him. I don't believe that's because he wanted to have control. Or at least it's not entirely because he wanted to have control. Michael was not only an observant religious man, he had a deeply spiritual soul. A slichot service at KKBE left him quite moved, emotional even. The power of moments before the open ark during the Elah at Park Avenue Synagogue stayed with him for much of the year to follow. Eyes closed, palms raised, listening to certain pieces played on the organ or piano, you could almost watch his soul elevate. No one appreciated the poignancy of a thoughtfully constructed sermon or the eloquence of a well-crafted service like Michael. And so this last mitzvah we do for him is really a gift he's left for us, to hear words, music, and recollections that meant the most to him, to gain a glimpse of that which brought him comfort as he contemplated his passage from this world to whatever awaits beyond. Zichrono livracha, as we remember Michael in the way he wished to be remembered, we affirm that his memory will ever be a cherished and abiding blessing. We will follow the order of service as it appears before you in our program this afternoon. We begin with a musical selection, and we'll follow it with a moment of silence. Isaiah 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I beheld my Lord seated on a high and lofty throne, and the skirts of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs stood in attendance on him. Each of them had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his legs, and with 2 he would fly. And one would call to the other, Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts. His presence fills all the earth. The doorposts would shake at the sound of the one who called, and the house kept filling with smoke. I cried, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my own eyes have beheld the King, Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew over to me with a live coal, which he had taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. He touched it to my lips and declared, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt shall depart, and your sin be purged away. Then I heard the voice of my Lord saying, Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And I said, Here I am. Send me. Call now upon Michael's cousin, Dr. William Theodore, to offer our first eulogy.
Barton should, of course, be giving this eulogy. I cannot take his place, but I would like to talk on a personal level about how much fun it was to know Michael growing up. Barton and I were the same age, as were Michael and my sister Andrea, who can't be here today because of her own orthopedic issues. We lived a few blocks from each other in Manhattan, and we were together all the time. It was always wonderful to walk around Manhattan with Michael while he pointed out the architectural features and decorations of all of the apartment buildings and discussed the layouts of Park Avenue apartments. He knew the history of many of the townhouses on the Upper East Side where we lived. At the same time, he would mock gently or not so gently the pretensions of the elite inhabitants of those apartments. And I'm not quite sure that he wasn't making a little bit of subtle fun of himself by calling his Charleston apartment Park Avenue South. The Kogans had 2 dogs, Baron and later Argy, rather quiet and contemplative boxers. I don't think Michael was their main champion. My Aunt Margie was the one who really loved them. But he looked at them with a kind of distant benevolence and almost philosophical interest in their intellectual abilities. And he was particularly impressed when Argy was able to find his way around locked doors in the house through back corridors. Michael's creativeness and I think playfulness informed his love of toy soldiers, which for him were not physical collectibles, but avatars from some kind of spiritual realm which filled his life with a sense of history and pageantry and connection, I think, to the past of America, and also, as you know from all of the wonderful displays and dioramas that he made, the particular past of Charleston. He was actually a very good painter of many of the little toy soldiers, but he and Barton, in addition, once built a very nice recreation out of balsa wood of Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple. His parents had a house in Atlantic Beach where I used to spend a lot of time, particularly at the end of the summer. And Michael planted flowers there assiduously, particularly roses. It's possible he was thinking of St. Elizabeth of Hungary. And he also made up amazing odd poker games where you only saw the other person's cards, not your own. So you had to kind of guess bizarrely what was going on. He also loved to build sand castles. which, you might not think about, including an attempt under the boardwalk to replicate Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple in sand and shells. But then suddenly he would decide that he was the building inspector and come along and say something that Barton and I had been building was out of code and it had to cut down. And we went along with it. So my Aunt Margie and Uncle Nat were both politically active in local politics. Interestingly, mainly from a relatively liberal point of view. So Michael had strong role models for his activities. He did, however, once tell me that he was a born controversialist, but he did have the knack of at least partially disinfecting outlandish ideas. His opinions, however, were never straightforward. One day, he had come out of his apartment, this was in Charleston, to find someone photographing the back of his car. And the guy explained to Michael that he had never before seen a Sons of Confederate Veterans license plate and a Bernie Sanders bumper sticker. I was actually too impressed by Michael, who was the first person to expose me to the idea that religion and philosophy are subjects of fascinating conversation and not something that you just listen to in a congregation or read about in books, to argue with him at all as a teenager. The first time that I ever heard anyone actually use the word logos was in the den of 1185 Park Avenue right in front of the television set, and I'm pretty sure that I thought he was saying low ghost at the time. But later I was able to deploy some of my history and classics background to discuss things with him, at least to some effect. And this was, of course, the kind of thing that he loved. So when I got older, I could engage him in more than defending the sandcastles. Michael had a very strong sense of family and, of course, the value of tradition. So he's very attentive to his mother after his father died, and also to our grandmother after our grandfather died, and took, I think, several trips with her. He actually loved my children. He didn't, of course, have any children or grandchildren of his own, and even my grandchildren, who he was able to know a little bit through videos. He found dolls to match each child's name, Alexander Graham Bell, Charles Darwin, Clara Barton, and Marie Curie for Lila, his mother is a doctor, and there wasn't a Lila doll, I think, that he could find. After Aunt Margie died, he, along with Barton, came to our house every year for Thanksgiving, as long as he was able to travel, and he would always see my mother when he visited New York. His father had been president of the Park Avenue Synagogue, and his love for the service there was enriched also very much, I think, by a kind of familial piety. So I have no brothers, so I feel that I can end by saying, in perpetuum frater, ave atque vale, forever, brother, hail and farewell. Thank you.
Isaiah 58, verses 6 through 12. Know this is the hungry, and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst forth through like the dawn, and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall march before you. The presence of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then, when you call, the Lord will answer. When you cry, he will say, "Here I am." If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand and evil speech, and you offer your compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then shall your light shine in darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. The Lord will guide you always. He will slake your thirst in parched places and give strength to your bones. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters do not fail. Men from your midst shall rebuild ancient ruins. You shall restore foundations laid long ago, and you shall be called repairer of fallen walls, restorer of lands for habitation. We call now on Dr. Kogan's friend, Dr. James Gorney, and he'll be followed by a piece of music.
At the age of 16, I discovered Cuban cigars. Cabana Superfinos were my particular favorite. One day, as a freshman at Syracuse University, as I walked down the hallway, I recognized a familiar smell. I located the room it was coming from, and I knocked, and a voice said, "Come on in." I opened the door, and there was Michael, sitting in a chair, his feet up on the desk, smoking that very same Cabana Superfino. Thus, we immediately bonded and became roommates for the remainder of our college career. Surprisingly, given his later great intellectual accomplishments, Michael did not think at that point that he was particularly smart when I first met him. However, at my foolish urging, I convinced him to enroll with me in an advanced philosophy seminar where we read Immanuel Kant's formidable Critique of Pure Reason. Michael more than held his own in this seminar, and this set him on his lifelong philosophical and religious journey. Michael did not grow up in a deeply Orthodox Jewish family, but midway through college, he became very serious about embracing his Jewish heritage. And he became conservadox in his practice, and he began strictly to follow the kosher laws. Michael's mother had been surreptitiously sending him $200 a week in cash, which his father never found out about, and that was a lot of money in those days. The college food was terrible, and Michael, who had very refined culinary tastes, took us out 3 or 4 evenings a week to Casa Lorenzo, by far the best restaurant in town. I'm sure that we became their very best regular customers. So on graduation weekend, Michael's parents and my parents came to town, and of course, we had a gala meal all together at Casa Lorenzo. Mario, the chef and owner, came to the table and said proudly that he would make something very special for all of us. Shortly thereafter, with great ceremony, Mario arrived tableside with a large platter of linguine Alfredo. However, this was a bit different, as it had specks of meat in it. Mario proudly said, "I added some real Italian prosciutto ham to make it special for you." He served everyone, and I held my breath. To my astonishment, Michael ate a few forkfuls of the dish and complimented Mario. Later, when I asked him about it, he said, and I remember his exact words to this day, he said, "I believe that being kind and considerate to others is even more important than following the kosher laws." This was the character of my deepest friend. After graduation, Michael entered the Jewish Theological Seminary with the goal of becoming a rabbi, and simultaneously embarked upon his own personal psychoanalysis. The latter forged a further link between us as I myself eventually went on to become a psychoanalyst. Even at that stage, Michael's creative philosophical mind was so wide-ranging that he found rabbinical training too restrictive, and he moved on to Columbia University in philosophy and then received his doctorate in religious studies at Syracuse. Over the years, Michael was an integral part of my and my family's life. He was there for the birth of my two children, Rachel and Rebecca, who is here with us today. Rebecca is named Rebecca Michelle in honor of guess who. He was the best man at my first marriage to Paula, who is here, and my subsequent marriage to Beverly, who is also here. We spent 30 consecutive New Year's Eves together. Michael established a major academic career at Montclair State University in New Jersey. Eventually, he became chairman there of the Department of Religion and Philosophy, serving in this role for over 20 years. He was an extraordinarily inspired teacher, as many of you here know firsthand. At Montclair, there were many students from disadvantaged and immigrant backgrounds. Michael went out of his way to mentor them and was so proud to see many of these students go on for graduate study. In addition to being a master teacher, Michael went on to eventually make a very significant contribution to theology. In his great book, Opening the Covenant, published by Oxford University Press, which is the top of the line, Michael made the radical proposition that both Judaism and Christianity could be usefully informed by aspects of each other's theology. This is a radical and courageous proposition, and certainly did not endear him to everyone in both the Jewish and Christian communities. Yet Michael lived this. As has been said before, on Friday evening and Saturday morning, you could find him in synagogue. On Saturday, you could find him on Sunday, you could find him in church, possibly giving the sermon. Michael could be very strong-willed, opinionated, and stubborn, and did not suffer fools gladly. But he evolved. His politics began on the far right, but eventually moved to the left. We both shared a passion for classical music, and Michael's special love was for Handel, as you can hear today. He was so proud of his great-great-grandfather, who was, this is true, a circuit-riding rabbi for the Confederacy. Michael loved the South, and in particular, he loved this beautiful city where his ancestors had lived and were buried. When he retired here, he truly felt like he had finally come home. In many ways, Michael Kogan was a larger-than-life character, more dramatic than an eclipse. And my daughter suggested I put that in. Even in the context of declining health over the past several years, he continued to teach and inspire. He made very important contributions to the musical and religious life of this holy city. Toward the end, he was supported by loving friends. In particular, I wish to recognize Mr. Charles Green, who is with us, and Mrs. Harriet McDougall, who is with us. They were enormous, loving supports for Michael. In conclusion, I wish all of you to take notice of my tie. It depicts images from a medieval tapestry. Once when Michael came to Knoxville, Tennessee for a visit with us, he was wearing this very same tie. I noticed it and remarked on its subtle beauty. At that, Michael took the tie off, handed it to me, and said, "It's yours now." Thereby, Michael's life was filled with gifts to others, both big and small. In conclusion, in the Jewish Kabbalah, it is said, quote, To redeem one person is to redeem the world. In his teaching, his mentoring, his friendships, and his acts of charity, Michael Kogan's life was truly a life of redemption. Rest in peace, my dear and beloved friend. In the words of Shakespeare, good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
We'll hear now from friends Steve D'Amico, followed by Harriet McDougall.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen D'Amico, and I'm here to speak on behalf of my parents, Deanna London and Vincent D'Amico, who couldn't make the journey here today, although they're on Zoom. I'm going to start with a few words written by my mother, Deanna, who was one of Michael's dearest friends, and I'll wrap up with some thoughts of my own. Here's what Mom wrote. I've known Michael, a.k.a. Mikey, for 43 years. We met on the Jewish holiday of Purim when Michael was president of Congregation Shomrei Emunah in Montclair, New Jersey. Purim, of course, a holiday where we traditionally wear fun costumes, like on Halloween. Michael was sitting on the bima, and he had a very silly hat on. And 5 minutes later, he had another silly hat on. 5 minutes later, another, and so on and so forth. The night went on like this, and I'm thinking, who is this guy? I found out, and so began a long and loving friendship. Michael had a reputation of disliking children, a reputation he joyfully cultivated, even though it was not true in the slightest. What a joy to see him rolling around the floor with our son and laughing hysterically. Picture Michael debating a 5-year-old on pick a subject. The subject didn't matter, be it religion, politics, favorite foods. It was for me a joy. This went on for years, and I credit Michael for our son's debating and speaking skills. Picture Halloween, and your doorbell rings. Thinking it might be a trick-or-treater, you open the door, candy in hand. Instead, it's Michael, wearing a t-shirt and some old slacks. Entering the home like a fugitive on the lam, he needed a place to lay low to avoid the doorbell rings at his home. He was always welcome. My heart is saddened at the passing of my dear friend. He will remain with me, as I know with you all, as an extraordinarily sweet, generous, and decent man. May he rest in peace. Now for some words of my own, which I have to admit are hard to find. You know, one of the unfortunate side effects of our Jewish tradition of having a memorial service so quickly is that it doesn't give you time to write the perfect speech or a perfect eulogy. But maybe that's a good thing, because the only option left is to speak from the heart. Simply put, Michael was like a second father to me. He was ever present in my life and helped make me the man I am today. He taught me how to have a thoughtful opinion and express it politely and persuasively. He taught me about faith and religion. He took me to Gilbert and Sullivan shows, making me one of the few millennials who know about the very model of a modern major general. He took me to the Second Avenue Deli, where we had corned beef and pastrami. He humored me one time when the workers at the Second Avenue Deli were on strike. And I told him that my mother, who is very liberal and Michael was very conservative at the time, taught me to never cross a picket line. Think about that for a second. A 10-year-old looking up at Michael, of all people, and saying that he didn't feel comfortable crossing a picket line. But that's what he taught me, and all of us, honestly, that you should never be afraid to speak up or express an opinion. The consequence, we spent 2 hours in UN traffic going over to Fine and Shapiro's instead. He gave me my first car, which gave me my freedom, and it was that very same car that we had driven. And when it came time to marry the love of my life, Stephanie, he performed our marriage ceremony. And in typical Michael fashion, just like this service, it dragged on a little bit. The long and short of it is that he loved me unconditionally, and it was wonderful. But, and this is really important, I wasn't the only one. Michael extended this generosity of spirit to many, many, many others. Some his students, some children of her friends, some he met right off the street. He was a mentor, friend, and confidant to hundreds of people. And seeing so many of you all here, I mean, Marshall, Sam, I know Ervin, you're watching. There's so many others who I don't know. And even though so many of us haven't met, many of you I'm meeting for the first time, many of you I haven't seen in years, we are all bound and linked in fellowship to the spirit of this great man who meant so much to all of us. And here's what makes Michael all the more remarkable. When you grew up the way Michael did, knowing that if you didn't want to, you didn't have to work a day in your life, can have some challenging outcomes, but not for Michael. Michael dedicated his life to serving others, to educating others, to sharing his knowledge, to taking joy in mentoring hundreds of young men and women. It was this generosity that gave Michael his spirit, his soul, his life's work, his joy. And he lived that life until the very end with a vibrancy and complete indifference to the physical challenges. When my wife and I traveled here about a year ago to introduce him to our newborn son, Leonardo, we remarked that he was an inspiration of how to live your life. Forget the darn kidney transplant, Michael was going to live every second enjoying this holy city of Charleston, a city that he loved with all of his heart and all of his soul, and it was a city that loved him back. As I close, I would like to express a special piece of gratitude to Charles Green and Harriet. Charles, as many of you know, works at 1 King Street where Michael lives and has been a constant source of support and assistance for Michael since he moved here. As we all know, Michael was an incredibly private person who never wanted anybody to see him as vulnerable. And Charles, you allowed him to keep that dignity. And I cannot thank you enough. Thank you. I'd like to conclude with a short anecdote. Michael told me a story once about how he went to a cigar shop here in town. And as Michael was wont to do, he lit up a cigar and looked around for someone to have a vibrant conversation with. And as it did for Michael, it inevitably turned to religion and politics. The owner of the shop came out. He wasn't happy. There are only 2 things I don't allow in my shop. That's discussing religion and politics. As Michael responded, as we all know he would, but religion and politics are the only interesting things to talk about. And before my closing joke was upstaged, I was going to say, and that's why, ladies and gentlemen, he's the only person in the world with a Sons of Confederate Veterans license plate and a Bernie Sanders bumper sticker. And you all are not the only one who's been with him while people have taken photographs. It's nearly gone viral online a couple times. I will miss arguing with Michael for the rest of my life. It was our love language. I love you, Michael. Thank you.
I'm embarrassed at being named. I loved Michael, and the depth of it was a pretty deep friendship, but I don't deserve to be called out for being nice to him. I mean, that was the easiest thing in the world. Grumpy as he was when he felt that things were not exactly as he would prefer. But he had the great gift of letting you know that without being truly offensive about it, which was a gift. Michael's table, his dinner table, sticks in my memory with such pleasure. I ate there many times, 10 people, 12 people. Towards the later months of his life, Sue Simmons Wallace, who is not being named enough here, would go and set the table for him, because setting a table takes a lot of walking around the table, and then walking around the table, and then bringing the napkins and the glasses, and Sue did that for him very regularly. Michael fed me in all kinds of ways. The first was his constant food at that dinner table, always good, thanks to Charles and Anita's daughter mostly, but also in the spirit and in the heart. He was a generous man spiritually and religiously, really in every way. He gave and gave, and I think everyone in this room is richer for his life and will remain so for the rest of our lives. He was a cool cat.
From Isaiah chapter 60, and I will just note that Michael had me reflecting upon these words precisely as the eclipse hit its peak here in Charleston yesterday. Arise, shine, for your light has dawned. The presence of the Lord has shone upon you. Behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick clouds the peoples. But upon you the Lord will shine, and his presence be seen over you. And nations shall walk by your light, kings by your shining radiance. And your people, all of them righteous, shall possess the land for all time. They are the shoot that I planted, my handiwork in which I glory. The smallest shall become a clan, the least a mighty nation. I, the Lord, will speed it in due time. We invite now Michael's colleague and friend, Dr. David Bossman, to speak, and then Father Vincent Rigdon will share Psalm 91.
I think we've gotten to see some of Michael's friends and Michael's communities, beginning with the cigar smokers. And I was going to mention that anyway, because that was a community of Michael's. He enjoyed going to the cigar bar and talked with those people and found wisdom there and shared his with them. Carolina Day was a very special day for Michael. He went to celebrate not only Confederates, but the Union. In fact, that's something he emphasized with Carolina Day. Carolina was the whole of Carolina, not just one aspect of it. It came more to be a Confederate celebration, and Michael was happy to participate in that. But nonetheless, he emphasized that it was for both. The Handel oratorios. Michael built a community of those who attended the oratorios, which essentially were the history of his people in music. And he relished that. He liked to promote that and sponsored an annual presentation of one of Handel's oratorios. And he brought people together to celebrate that. The Spoleto Festival. He loved the chamber music. He loved the operas. He loved participating in the whole process of planning and the execution of the Spoleto Festival. Again, that was his public, that was his community, being a member of the board of the Spoleto Festival. He was a guardian of the Defenders of Charleston monument. As you know, there was a concern about taking statues down, and Michael was opposed to those, particularly taking Robert E. Lee statues down. But the Confederate Defenders of Charleston monument, which was within eyeshot of his apartment, was a special area where he wanted to protect, because he said there was a legitimacy to what they did. And I think he had a right to defend them because they defended the city, not the cause of the Confederacy in any broader sense, but they defended Charleston. And he said that should be celebrated. And he maintained his presence at that monument, trying to defend it, and it was not taken down. And I think the city made a wise decision the way they handled that whole issue. The Castle Pinckney Sons of the Confederacy. Castle Pinckney, as you know, was in the middle of Charleston Harbor, and it flies a flag, and it's not a Yankee flag. So Michael always spoke about his family legacy, his mother's legacy of being Charlestonian and South Carolinian. And from childhood in New York, growing up in New York, he was a member of the Sons of the Confederacy, and his mother was the Daughters of the Confederacy. So that was something which was important to him, and he wanted that presence to be recognized in South Carolina. Michael's being Jewish and kosher, I think meant a great deal to him, as his roommate in college explained. He kept kosher. My favorite story about that was when Luna Kaufman and Michael and I were having dinner one time at the fish restaurant on King Street. Michael was inquiring what was in the various dishes. And he was doing it to such an extent that Luna, who's a Holocaust survivor, 4 years in the camps, and certainly very Jewish, said, "Michael, why do you keep kosher?" And Michael said, "Luna, because God wants me to keep kosher. Why don't you keep kosher?" And she said, "Because God doesn't want me to." But it goes back to the story about Michael's being a philosophy major and meeting his major professor, Vahanian, at Syracuse University. Vahanian said in class one time, "If you truly believe in God, there must be something that you do that visibly manifests that belief in God." And Michael said, "I chose being kosher." And he said, "In that sense, God wants me to." His reference to the Park Avenue Synagogue, Michael was very proud of his membership there. And I went with him one time for Rosh Hashanah, and the cantor is absolutely terrific and beautiful. It's a beautiful synagogue. He would always go with Barton, his brother, and there was a family reunion every year, or for every of the holidays. He would go to that synagogue and celebrate their family presence in that synagogue. It was a very beautiful thing that Michael dearly missed when his brother died. He celebrated Passover Seders for a very large community of people in Charleston. He would have a Jewish night, he would have a Christian night, he would have a mixed night, he would have and he had different groups that he would entertain, not only for Passover and Robert E. Lee's birthday, but also for things that various groups represented, and they were part of him. I met Michael through Eva Fleischner, who was a faculty member at Montclair State University. Her father was Jewish, and her mother was Christian, so she was raised Christian, but she felt she had a Jewish heart. And so Eva, I was involved in Jewish Christian studies at Seton Hall University, and Eva attended one of our lectures at Seton Hall, so that Eva said, "You have to meet Michael Kogan." So she invited me over for dinner, and Michael as well. And we stayed up until about 2 or 3 in the morning. And when I tell people stories about that heroic conversation that we had, they say, "So what else is new?" When Michael gets involved in a conversation, it never ends. And that's true because it became a lifelong conversation that I had with Michael, and that he educated me about, and we shared a lot of good thoughts together. He admired Sister Rose Thiering at Seton Hall, who was a woman who promoted Holocaust education and fighting anti-Semitism in support of the State of Israel. And so we started a program called the Sister Rose Thiering Fund to provide tuition scholarships for teachers who teach courses relating to lessons from the Holocaust, which would include the whole history of the relationship between Jews and Christians, and also the questions that revolve around values for pluralistic society and cooperative relations in social service. If you look at the website of Montclair State, you'll see a page dedicated to Michael Kogan, honoring him as an emeritus professor. And it's well worth seeing that page. It's easy to find. Just Google Montclair State University, Michael Kogan, and it gives a whole series of comments by Michael's students, that Michael was a passionate teacher, that he was an enthusiastic teacher, that he inspired enthusiasm in his students. So he was there 42 years, and you could just imagine what good he did over the course of those 42 years. He really had made a tremendous impact on the community. So he had inspired engagement with his students. And so the many groups, many dimensions of the whole person, Michael, is compositely a marvel to behold. And I have a text written by Ursula Niebuhr, the wife of Reinhold Niebuhr, or Reinhold Niebuhr's is her husband. And it's something that I think is particularly apt for this. She wrote, "The eternity of love. It is easier to think of that than the immortality of the soul. Whatever things be good and true and beautiful, they remain. So perhaps it was the instinct that people who express the good as the human life of Jesus and the human life of those who follow him in his love do remain and last and are pointers toward the realm of the mysterious and transcendent. So in that sense, we can say we live." Thank you.
A reading from the 91st Psalm. O you who dwell in the shelter of the Most High and abide in the protection of Shaddai, I say of the Lord, my refuge and stronghold, my God in whom I trust, that he will save you from the fowler's trap, from the destructive plague. He will cover you with his pinions. You will find refuge under his wings. His fidelity is an encircling shield. You need not fear the terror by night, or the arrow that flies by day, the plague that stalks in darkness, or the scourge that ravages at noon. 1,000 may fall at your left side, 10,000 at your right, but it shall not reach you. You will see it with your eyes. You will witness the punishment of the wicked, because you took the Lord, my refuge, the Most High, as your haven. No harm will befall you, no disease touch your tent, for he will order his angels to guard you wherever you go. They will carry you in their hands, lest you hurt your foot against a stone. You will tread on cubs and vipers. You will trample lions and asps. Because he is devoted to me, I will deliver him. I will keep him safe, for he knows my name. When he calls on me, I will answer him. I will be with him in distress. I will rescue him and make him honored. I will let him live to a ripe old age and show him my salvation.
In Judaism, we believe there is a body and there is a soul, and we will return Michael's body to the earth. The soul, we pray with the words of El Malei Rachamim, will find its eternal peace and rest in God's presence. We invite you to please, as you're able, to rise.
El Malei Rachamim שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים טהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת מרדכי בן דבורה מלכה הכהן שהלך לעולמו. בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר אמן.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Michael Sincoff Kogan, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Following the concluding musical selection Michael has chosen for us, we will be proceeding over to Cumming Street Cemetery for the burial. There's no parking at Cumming Street Cemetery. I can't make that any better than it is. I can strongly encourage that we carpool over there together. Everyone in this room has something in common. You knew and loved Michael, so maybe we can load into cars together. But once we're there, we'll have a brief service. If you're not able to make it to the cemetery, I do want to let you know that there will be a reception that follows that service at Harriet's home, 129 Trad Street, and everyone is invited to join back there. We conclude here in our sanctuary with our final musical piece.